much to me. Hi everyone. Anthony Fantano here, the internet's busiest music nerd. And it's time for a classic review of Miss Patti Smith's Horses. Patti Smith, one of rock music's most revolutionary voices, most exciting poets, and this is her debut full-length record, Horses. 1975, this record came out, years before punk music was a trend. But in this year, Patti was helping to lay the groundwork for this exciting, explosive, game-changing genre of music, shoulder to shoulder with other artists that were taking more simplistic, artsy, visceral approaches to rock music. Bands like the Velvet Underground, and it should be known that the Velvet Underground's John Cale produced this record. Also, MC5, of whom Patti Smith's husband was the lead guitarist, Fred Sonic Smith. Also, the Modern Lovers, the Stooges. John Cale also produced for them. Richard Hell and the Voidoids as well. Again, these are artists that were taking a more visceral approach to rock music for their time. A more chaotic approach, chaotic sonically, chaotic emotionally. And on this record, Patti and her band came through not with a focus on flashy playing or super duper catchy slick songs, but instead poetry, passionate musical performances, and vocals. Songs that had a strong element of storytelling and also like some strong philosophical convictions. On this record, Patti was really trying to make an urgent statement of some sort, even if that statement doesn't always ring through very clearly. There's just a very great sense of that on almost every single one of these tracks. And even though Horses is maybe not as explosive sonically as a record like Kick Out the Jams or like Raw Power, what Patti was saying on this record, her words on this record, make this music just as earth-shattering as any of the music of her contemporaries. The importance of Patti Smith's vocals and her lyrics on this record is shown in the fact that her vocals are turned way up in the mix and not really at a detriment to the music. Give a listen to the opening cut on this record, Gloria, which is actually a cover. Odd for a record to start off with a cover song, but this is Patti Smith and her band's version of essentially the Van Morrison song that he used to perform when he was with the band Them. And on the surface of this track, when you just read into the lyrics, the song seems to be about a man who is sort of lusting after this sweet young thing. And this guy has plans to sort of make her mine, as he says in the lyrics. But in Patti's hands, this track takes on a totally different meaning. With Patti Smith, you've got to kind of read beyond the surface level of these lyrics in order to sort of get what she's getting at. She's someone who is very much into symbolism and esoteric references, but she leaves you enough clues to kind of pull it all together for yourself if you read into her verses enough. Before I get into the lyrics, I do want to say that Patti Smith's vocal performance on this track is fantastic. Her voice is passionate, it's over the top, it's emotional, it's yelpy, it's intense, at times it's animalistic. However, it starts off very somber and very quiet with a bit of a poem written by Patti where she boldly states that Jesus Christ died for somebody's sins, but not mine. So here she's open to the idea of sin and sinning, but she's rejecting this whole concept of religious guilt. She's embracing this idea of self-determination, rejecting these rules, rejecting these regulations, as she says later in this bit of the poem, where all these words being thrown at her by other people saying to her, beware, beware. It's just a way for someone to sort of step in and try to control her life, which she just outright shoves away as violently as possible. The intro to this track is about self-determination and just the freedom to make one's own decisions, good or bad. And I think that's what the underlying message of Gloria is when Patti and her band are performing it anyway. And this track is also kind of about the excitement of one's own lustful pursuits. And also on top of that, all of this meaning behind this song, kind of an added layer of context, something that makes this song even more interesting, is the fact that Patti is singing it. We have this very androgynous sort of image on the cover of this record. Not really sort of the sexy portrayal most female artists sort of get on their cover art. And then we have the same female singing this song that was at that once written from the standpoint of a man. Through all of this, this song ends up getting kind of gender bent and playing with the idea of gender as well as sexuality. That theme is continued on to the next track of the song, Redondo Beach, which lyrically was a track that was inspired by an argument that Patti had with her sister that sent her out for the day, and she was confused, like, where is she? Oh my God. But instead, on the song, we get this starting point, very similar starting point, but eventually it ends up with this person. It seems like they're looking for their lover, and they go down to Redondo Beach, and they're kind of hanging around the shore. And then eventually their lover, because of suicide, a suicidal decision that this person made, the body washes up on the beach, and all of these people are like, oh my God. Pretty freaking dark and morbid, especially considering that the instrumental on this track has kind of an off-kilter, just fruity reggae vibe to it. That a lot of American bands that were sort of doing this proto-punk thing weren't necessarily embracing. It's definitely a bit of a left field kind of thing for Patti and her band to be sort of, doing what they were doing on this record with this instrumental. Reggae was definitely in full swing by this point, but Patti and her band got to it before the punks would end up getting to it in the late 70s and sort of embraced it through like all these second wave ska bands as well as groups like The Clash and all that. And I just love the groove on this song too. Moving on to the next track on here, Birdland. This is the album's first lengthy cut, standing at 9 minutes, and Patti takes this opportunity to tell a pretty vivid and detailed story of a man's first moments of solitude after the conclusion of his father's funeral. And this track is, for me, it just kind of seems like this moment when this man, or really anybody, it's like about that moment of initial impact when it finally just hits you that you're never going to see this person again, and your brain goes crazy trying to rationalize that. The whole concept of this track is actually pulled from a passage of Peter Riesch's Book of Dreams, hope I'm pronouncing his last name correctly, and this track is a lot like many other songs on here that are also inspired by other poems, other writers, dreams, as well as personal experiences, and each one of them, whether Patti has experienced them or not, she sort of takes them and puts a different spin on them in order to sort of make them an interesting song topic. And she pretty much does that one track after the other. Now, Birdland, I wouldn't say it has the most engaging instrumental. I mean, that's really kind of one of the downsides of this record. The instrumentals sometimes are just okay, but I think that's mostly because it's really just all about Patti during moments like this, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. If you're going to get something out of this track and a few other tracks on here, especially the longer ones, you've really got to tune into what Patti is saying, because there's a lot of viscera in the way she delivers the poetry on this record. If you're looking for the excitement, if you're looking for the oomph on these tracks, you've got to tune into the stories that Patti is telling. You've got to tune into the way she is delivering her lyrics on these tracks. Songs like Free Money, though, are a little more direct and hard-hitting. This track has a beautiful piano opening, and I love the way the drums and the guitars speed up toward the very intense finish of this track. Really catchy refrain on the song, Free Money! And the lyrics are beautiful as well, sort of about growing up poor and just wanting money to get things and fix things and have that peace of mind of just being able to help your loved ones and just live a drama and worry-free life. There are references to just having dreams of winning the lottery on this track, as well as also just stealing money, because that's just how dire the need for it is. And because of Patti's upbringing, just the idea of not having money and the idea of being poor and money-less hits an emotional nerve, as does the song Kimberly, which is a bit of an ode to her youngest sister. And the song is kind of two-sided. It begins really beautiful and kind of like another moment on this record where Patti lyrically is exploring this moment of impact of, I guess, the first time you're sort of holding this new, young life, and it just kind of hits you like a ton of bricks, and just all your love for this little human being just sort of rushes at you. But then toward the end of the song, we're sort of seeing Patti clutching her baby sister, running out of a barn because the barn has been struck by lightning and it's on fire and there's bats flying everywhere. It's actually pretty horrifying. At the moment, sort of that feeling of love for this little baby is established, and then later in the song, that love is sort of put to the test as Patti has to, with a snap decision in a moment of danger, sort of save this child from death, because if she wasn't there, being a full-grown adult or a full-grown person being able to sort of carry that baby out of that dangerous situation, that baby would have died right there. Protecting life from harm in the midst of traumatic events, and just the power of love, to me, is sort of what this track is all about. And the song Break It Up is another fantastic track on here, not only because I think the instrumental is great, the soaring guitar on the hook here is beautiful and reminds me a lot of what bands like Television would be doing a few years down the road on records like Marquee Moon, but also the really esoteric and kind of morbid lyrics that deal in sort of angels on here. Another kind of weird moment on this record where Patti is giving us like this really strong religious reference, or just a reference to spirituality, but at the beginning of the record she sort of, again, rejects that whole guilt via sin whole kind of thing. But still, the lyrics on this record, even though they are a little esoteric, they are very stirring, as is the case on the next song, Land, which is another very long cut on here, 9 minutes long. And the riff on this track, if you give a listen, will be very familiar because it's not really that different from the song Gloria. It's actually a bit of a reprise in a way, though they don't come out and say it or sing it or reference it in any other direct way than this riff. But when I caught Patti live earlier this year playing Horses from front to back, they actually started singing the Gloria hook over this song, kind of bringing the whole record together. And the intro to this track, the moment where she is singing horses, 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 as I was giving this record multiple listens, just kind of refamiliarizing myself with it to do this review, it actually hit me like a ton of bricks. Like that moment is very obviously a point of reference for Savages when they did the freaking song Husbands. And I love that song, and I don't know why it wasn't apparent to me. Regardless, this track is really Patti kind of tying this whole record up in a sense. It's like all the intense emotions that have been building up thus far on this record, all coming out in this really visceral track. Not only is the instrumental explosive, but Patti's words and the story told on this record are really explosive as well. We have a bit of text toward the beginning of this track of this protagonist named Johnny getting into this sort of fight, very physical, very violent. I believe it's a William S. Burroughs reference. But then from this violent outburst, we have this protagonist bringing us through a series of events dealing in drugs and violence and just sheer insanity, even a moment where he is like at a venue where this band is playing called the Twistalettes. And there's actually quite a few rock and roll references on here, not just with the riff, but also a big Little Richard reference in the lyrics here where she's sort of referencing doing the Watootsie and the mashed potato. And Patti essentially pushes this protagonist through just this series of rapid fire events, just hitting us with one idea and just kind of one scary, freakish, or very fun thing after the next. It kind of reminds me of some of the long, wordier tracks from the Velvet Underground back in the day, like Sister Ray or something like that, but a little more well-groomed and a little more clean and sort of put together. And this track just sort of shows how great of a poet Patti Smith is and how great she is when it comes to just pulling words together in a very explosive way and delivering them as if the situation is actually just happening right there in front of her, and she's trying her best to describe it to you as this instrumental is banging away in the background. It's a crazy freaking track, and again, I think it pulls the whole record together because the album kind of starts off with this moment where we're talking about, through, sort of this them song, Gloria, we're talking about self-determination, and we're talking about just kind of breakneck decisions and sort of being in this state of apathy and boredom and just like just this sheer lack of satisfaction, and all of a sudden the situation presents itself, and when that situation does present itself, to jump into something that seems like opportune, or seems like, hey, that would be way more fun, way more interesting, way more awesome than what the hell I'm doing now, than this boring party, than this original sin crap. I'm gonna go for it. However, Patti knows full well, even at this point in her career, that sometimes these risky decisions come at a cost, especially at this stage of her career where she's seen so many people who she came up with in music pass away. And when I caught her live, she openly said that that's what the final song on this record is really all about. It is a moment of mourning at the end of this record. It's a bit of poetry talking about not only this moment of loneliness at night, where Patti is sort of searching for this kind of outlet, for this release, for just a moment of, I guess, solace in the midst of all this misery. But the very end of this song ends with a line where she is saying, "I think it's sad, it's much too bad our friends can't be with us today." And it's sort of just a reflection on those people who she has lost at this point. In a way, this record is kind of a bit of a reflection on that whole idea of human misery, of death, and sort of that pain that we experience in our lives, really whether we're making horrible decisions or not, and then trying to douse that pain in something else, forget about it, or just escape from it, either by doing something stupid, or like in the case of the song Birdland, just facing it head on and really just dealing with it, and just kind of sitting through that emotional pain, sitting through that realization that you've lost someone really important to you forever. And it's on that really morbid note that the album just ends and leaves us to kind of reflect on the past 40 or so minutes that it threw at us, which was really just a torrent of all of these emotions, dealing in money and drugs and family and friends and people who we're in love with, and self-determination. It's a lot to take in, and a lot of the stuff on this record is actually very familiar, very everyday kind of stuff. However, Patti's very intense words make reflecting on these things very worthwhile and very important, because I think she reframes them with such passion and with such intensity that it's like, wow, man, I've never thought about how important all of this stuff that's all around me all the time, that I just sort of take for granted, that I just sort of take as normal. I've forgot about how really important all this stuff is. And that's kind of what Horses is all about to me. It's, I think, one of the punkest things ever. And not just because of just how in your face it is and how brash it is, but because of how introspective it is in an oddly explosive way. Patti delivers her lyrics on this record with such passion that when I'm listening to it, I mean, my ears perk up instantly, because it's just like, wow, this person's so passionate and so emotional right now. What she's saying has got to, she's got to be saying something. And I often get caught up in her emotions on this record, and I really got caught up in her emotions live, even more than I typically do when I give this album a listen. Yeah, she had me crying live. She had me crying. So I'm just going to put it at that. I'm just going to put it at that. Give this record a listen if you have not already. It's a fantastic album. Really poignant record is how I will put it. It's a poignant fucking record. Anthony Fantano, Patti Smith, Horses. Transition. Have you given this record a listen? You should have. I love you. Forever.